seat here, then we will audience. So it's socially distanced.
We still have like 20 minutes. We could.
I have 10 minutes.
We have 10 minutes. I just read my watch wrong.
Well, it was a visual thing.
Yeah.
Got it. It was dyslexic.
Good morning. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Faulkner, the Military Science Department Chair. Welcome to today's ceremony. At this time, would you please stand for the posting of our national colors? Please be seated. "19 years ago, we as a nation vowed we would remember the events of this day. I am pleased that by virtue of your presence here, we have maintained that promise. We come together again in this place to remember and to reflect on the historic tragedy of the events of September 11th, 2001, and the horrific loss of life. We come here with individual thoughts, fears, and experiences, but we are not alone in our grief and our pain. We are a community whose members support one another. We are here for one another, and together maintain the promise to remember. It's an example of why I feel honored to be part of this community, this university, and I'm always proud to be an American soldier. For it was not just the horror, the tragedies that occurred on September 11th. We also witnessed incredible actions unfold nationwide on this day 19 years ago that exemplify the very best of the attributes we honor and we all hope to aspire when historic events unfold upon us. That day we saw hundreds, if not thousands, of heroes run to the danger. Rather than seek safety, why would they do this? Why would they take that unnecessary danger upon themselves for others they likely don't know or have personal cause to make such a sacrifice? They did it because they believed in their charge, they believed in their profession, and the idea of their community. That was their community, that was their fellow Americans that were under attack that day, and they would help if they could. They would hazard the risk because somebody needed to. So I'm very proud to be here today, among others that have similarly taken oaths and committed themselves to helping one another in our community, in our state, and in our nation. In a moment, we will hear members of the Wind Ensemble, directed by Dr. Timothy Paul, perform America the Beautiful. This will be followed by 4 chimes symbolizing the 2 planes that destroyed the World Trade Center: the plane used to attack the Pentagon and the plane that crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Following the chimes, we will observe a moment of silence, and immediately following, IUP President Michael Driscoll will provide his perspective.
Good morning. I imagine that 19 years ago today, on September 11th, 2001, most of us said those 2 words a few times. I was living in Oregon, 3-hour time difference. My wife was the early riser. I got up, prepared to go to work that day, came out and said, "Good morning." She said, "Something's happening in New York." We do not have time to think, or we do not have to think very hard, rather, to put ourselves back into that Tuesday morning, do we? It was the dawn of a beautiful day weather-wise. If you close your eyes, you can still see the cloudless robin's egg blue sky, its calm beauty stretched high overhead. Although it started out as a beautiful day, tragically, it did not stay one. It became a day of horror, death, and sadness. It became one of the darkest days in our country's history. The ensuing months were a mix of sorrow, anger, confusion, anxiety, and hundreds of other intertwined and complex emotions. We were forced to pause and contemplate the new world we suddenly lived in. And we were scared. We changed everything that we did. We didn't feel safe leaving our homes. We stopped traveling. We sometimes allowed misinformation to cloud our judgments, and we did not know who to trust. It was a time of many questions and very few answers. I've asked you to go back to that day, not to relive the suffering, but because 9/11 should be remembered, not recalled. There is a difference between those two things, and it is an important distinction here today as we have started the fall semester with a group of promising new freshmen who most likely were not alive on September 11th, 2001. As time passes, too often critical events become distant in our rearview mirrors, and it takes prodding to bring them back to our consciousness from the depths of history. We cannot allow that to happen to September 11th. We must remember the sacrifices made that day, the lives lost, and the lives forever changed. That day we lost 3 of our own from the IUP family. Alumni Donald Jones, William Moskal, and William Sugra. And we will continue to honor them and their lives, which were cut short. We owe it to the victims, their families, and those who unselfishly fought to save others while putting their own lives in jeopardy. We owe it to remember September 11th and keep it close to our hearts. To someone who is not old enough to remember 9/11 or who was not yet born, the difficult events that day might feel like they happened in another time and place. Much like some of us could view World War II or Vietnam. But just as World War II brought about a renewed sense of national pride, and Vietnam gave an urgency to the civil rights movement, 9/11 gave us the opportunity to take a look at ourselves critically. And soon an era of volunteerism, unwavering support of our military and first responders, and a stronger sense of community came about. And it continues to be a part of our fabric almost 2 decades later. Those are things we need to rely on today as we face this time in our nation when uncertainty is the norm. The pandemic has forced us to change the way we do almost everything. We do not always feel safe leaving our homes. We still do not know who to trust. So what do? We can look back at that beautiful blue sky morning, remember those we lost, and those who put their lives in danger, and then remember all the ways we rose up, banded together, and did the hard work of helping Race did not matter, nor did religion or any other identifying factor. We looked at each other simply as people, and we cared for each other. Those kind of efforts are needed today. We cannot be selfish or unwelcoming or divisive. We must help each other to reach our potential. We must provide opportunities for everyone to succeed, and we must do it with compassion, empathy, and understanding. So let us always remember September 11th. Let us remember those we lost, those who made the ultimate sacrifice so others could live, and those families who were affected. Let us be inspired by the wave of humanity that came from such a difficult and painful day, and let us teach the generations to come the valuable lessons of love, empathy, and support. We at IUP will continue to mark this day in the years to come. We will not recall it, we will remember it. And we will remember all the ways in which we took that grief and despair and used it to rise up and help humanity heal. It was a day that we should not, cannot, and will not forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Driscoll. At this time, I'm pleased to invite Dr. Nadene Lamoureux, a faculty member for 22 years in the Department of Counseling and past president of IUP APSCF, to share her perspective on 9/11.
Good morning, members of the IUP community. Today it is my privilege to join you to pause and remember the horrific and life-changing events of September 11th, 2001, and to honor those whose lives were lost in the events that unfolded that day. It is important to remember the single deadliest terrorist attack in human history, as well as the deadliest event for firefighters, first responders, and law enforcement in the history of the United States, as well as to examine what led to this event and reflect on how it transformed our lives. I've been reflecting on the words memorial and honor while preparing for this event. The definition of memorial is to keep something in remembrance, to keep it alive. There are many reasons why we need to keep this event alive in our memories, and most particularly to remind ourselves and others that this cataclysmic event and the people who lost their lives on that day mattered. We want to honor and hold in great respect the lives that were lost, the first responders that rushed towards danger, many of whom lost their lives that day or even years later from health complications related to their acts of heroism. Since this date, there have been countless sacrifices of service and lives in the ongoing war against terrorism. It is our duty to ensure that these losses were not in vain, and to honor those who perished by continually working towards improving our society, our nation, and our world to ensure that these acts of violence can never happen again. On this anniversary, it is also important for us to reflect on how this event transformed our lives, regardless of how we were touched by the events of September 11th, 2001. I, like many of you, will never forget the images of two planes crashing into the north and south towers of the World Trade Center, of one plane crashing into the Pentagon, and another headed towards Washington, D.C., crashing into a field in Somerset County, only 50 miles from here. In the weeks that followed, we watched as these events were replayed, the death toll recorded each day, and stories that day emerged, stories of lives lost, stories of loved ones making phone calls in the face of impending doom to tell their loved ones they loved them. Acts of heroism as passengers on Flight 93 prevented their plane from reaching its destination, and we try to comprehend how this could have happened. Almost 3,000 people lost their lives that day, and 19 years later, we continue to experience the effects of 9/11 on our world, economically, socially, even culturally, as well as in terms of national and international security. I, like many of you, waited anxiously to learn of the news of loved ones who lived and worked in these areas, praying for their safety and fearing for the worst news. Our worlds were turned upside down that day. Many experienced vicarious trauma as we tried to restore some sense of normalcy into our daily lives. But what would normal mean moving forward? My personal story with 9/11 is a bit closer to home. September 11th, 2001 was a beautiful, crisp, early autumn day. I remember vividly as I was watching the news while folding laundry, a mundane, ordinary day, when I saw the sight of the first plane flying into the first tower in Manhattan. I did not have a schema in my brain to understand what I was seeing. It had to be a special effect in a movie. This couldn't be real. And this was juxtaposed against the image of my 7.5-month-old daughter sitting on a pink quilt on my living room floor, giggling and playing with a toy as sunshine streamed across her face. When I think of 9/11, I cannot do so without seeing my daughter's innocent face against the news of the terrorist attack. Innocence against hatred. Unlimited potential against devastating loss. Hope against defeat. In the aftermath of 9/11, 2001, I remember feeling mind-numbing despair for my daughter, for the world in which she would grow up, and I felt completely unprepared to parent her in this world. I myself did not have the tools for navigating such a world. How on earth could I help her, and later her younger sister, to exist in these changing conditions? I grieved for a world that they would never know. My children have never known a world without war and conflict. They have never known the excitement of watching a loved one deplane at the airport. They have always had to go through long security lines in the airport to have their luggage screened. Taking off shoes and x-ray machines have always been a part of their airport experience, and at times, so has seeing armed soldiers in some airports depending on world events. Surveillance, the concept of potentially having phone calls, text messages, and emails watched by others is not foreign to them. Having identification to open bank accounts, obtain employment, receive a paycheck, enroll in college are unquestioned. These activities go unquestioned because their life experiences provided the schema for them to exist in this world. Sometimes they ask me about my life as a teenager, college student, or young adult, and I feel twinges of grief for what they will not have. I learn from them daily about how to live in this world. This brings me to another reason why memorials are so important. Throughout our lives, we will experience profound grief in many forms, including grief surges that naturally accompany the experience of losses, including losses of loved ones, possessions, opportunities. Anything that can be valued can be lost and can be grieved. In my counseling practice now, I hear many people express that current events have brought with them a resurgence of the profound feelings of grief that they experienced on 9/11/2001, along with the accompanying experiences of feeling paralyzed by fear, overcome by anxiety, and unable to envision a future in which they will feel normal or okay again. Public memorials remind us that we have a shared human experience in spite of the fact that our connection to the circumstances or events are uniquely our own. If I polled each of you individually about your recollections of 9/11, some of the details may be similar to mine, and many of them will be quite different, and yet all are valid. Our shared human experiences are what bring us together in our families and communities. Knowing that we are not alone in spite of our differences is what helps to unite us and see that we are stronger together, even in our shared pain and grief. Grief is an emotion that changes over time, and yet grief remains present. Sometimes it's raw, gut-wrenching, and all-consuming. It distorts time. It disorients us. It causes us to be unfocused and wondering how normal life, whatever that is, can possibly go on or return. It changes our timeline. We mark time from before the loss to after the loss. We feel vulnerable, adrift, and alone. Over time, the rawness fades, but the pain remains. It may be dull or become twinges when we recall a specific event. We create a new normal as our loss stays in the background and can resurge at any moment, sometimes at anniversary times or special events. Sometimes the smell can pull a memory out of the recesses of our minds without warning, or a reminder falls out of the pages of a book. My children remind me of their great-grandparents or grandparents through their gestures, their sense of humor, or their shared talents. We are reminded of how these events mattered then and now. Then, September 11th, 2001, we were ripped out of our comfort zone and forced to acknowledge the very real threat of hatred based on different ideologies and beliefs, and the vulnerability that hatred poses for us without our awareness. We understood the need for security on many levels, and we were confronted once again by the atrocities that can be committed against humanity when we are not vigilant. History is replete with such examples from the dawn of time. Even now, we do not need to go far to see examples of how our differences can be demonstrated in violent and aggressive ways, how words can be used to divide and inflame, or to heal and unite. This particular day of remembrance is essential to show us who we have the potential to be, for good or for evil. We can use our experiences of grief and loss to help heal ourselves, our neighbors, our nation, and to remember what the cost can be if we forget. 19 years later, that 17-and-a-half-month-old baby is now a sophomore here at IUP, majoring in the burgeoning fields of environmental engineering and environmental science. She's excited and enthusiastic about the potential that lies ahead of her to make an impact in this world. On this day of remembrance, for those for whom we grieve on the anniversary of 9/11, I hope we will also choose to honor those precious souls by committing to a new normal that includes peace and hope about the potential that lies ahead of us to make a positive impact on this world. We cannot underestimate the power of hope in the face of adversity. I leave you with this poem penned by Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Monroe. At this time, I would ask if all first responders, fire, police, or EMT that are in the audience, if you would, please come forward and stand on one of the pavement markers we have identified here. At this time, we would like to honor you as Mr. James King performs Amazing Grace on the bagpipes and our cadets place wreaths at the base of the memorials. Thank you, Mr. King. Thank you also to all of our first responders and all those who continue to serve in our communities and the armed forces around the world. For those of you that wish to continue to reflect and discuss the impact of this tragedy on our nation, on our world, on your own life and your family, you are encouraged to contact faculty members from the campus ministries and members of the Council on Spiritual and Religious Life who are present in the Oak Grove this morning. Volunteers, if you would, please raise your hand to identify yourselves. Thank you. Thank you for being here this morning. You may also wish to review the display related to the tragic events of September 11th on the floor of Stapleton Library. Thank you to the IUP library team for your work on the annual memorial display. Thank you, musicians who performed, and to the members of our Army ROTC. I thank everyone for coming out today. At this time, if you would please stand as members of the IUP Army ROTC Honor Guard retire the colors.
Everybody serves in different. Thank you for your service today and what it meant to not only us being out, but all others. So thanks so much. Have a good one.